In the heart of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where rolling farmlands stretch beneath endless skies, 68-year-old Tom Brennan attends his first Amish auction after losing his wife of 45 years. Broken by grief and searching for meaning, he impulsively bids 50 cents on a decrepit wagon that no one else wants. A wagon that once belonged to the Yoder family, whose mysterious disappearance in 1943 remains the county's greatest unsolved mystery. What Tom discovers hidden within the wagon's secret compartment will not only solve an 80-year-old mystery, but will teach him that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't measured in dollars, but in the connections that bind us across time, faith, and loss. The morning mist hung over Lancaster County like a shroud, and Tom Brennan felt it was fitting. Everything in his world had been shrouded since Margaret died 6 months ago. 6 months, 3 days and 14 hours to be exact. He'd stopped counting the minutes only because she would have scolded him for it. "You're torturing yourself, Thomas," she would have said in that gentle way of hers, using his full name only when she wanted him to really listen. Life is for the living, but what was living when the person who made you feel alive was gone? Tom sat in his pickup truck outside the Stoltzfus farm, watching the Amish families arrive for the autumn auction. Horse-drawn buggies lined the fence like a scene from another century, their occupants moving with purpose and quiet dignity. He'd driven past these auctions 100 times in his 40 years living in Lancaster County, but Margaret had always been the one interested in authentic Amish crafts, as she called them. Tom had been content to wait in the truck with his coffee and newspaper. Today was different. Today, he'd woken up in their empty house, made coffee for 2 out of habit, and realized he couldn't spend another Saturday staring at Margaret's empty chair. Their daughter Lisa had been begging him to get out and do something, Dad, and their son Michael had even offered to fly in from Seattle to keep him company. But Tom didn't want company. He didn't know what he wanted. Maybe that's why he was here. The auction grounds were already bustling when Tom finally worked up the courage to leave his truck. The Amish community had laid out their goods with meticulous care. Handmade furniture that would last generations, quilts that were works of art, preserved foods in mason jars that gleamed like jewels in the morning sun. And then there were the odds and ends, the items that every auction seemed to accumulate: old tools, weathered barn doors, and in the far corner, almost hidden behind a collection of rusty plows, a wagon. It wasn't just any wagon. It was the saddest excuse for a wagon Tom had ever seen. The wood was grey with age and rot. One wheel was missing entirely, replaced by a stack of cinder blocks, and the whole thing listed to one side like a ship taking on water. A faded sign propped against it read, "As is, starts at 50. Tom found himself drawn to it. Maybe it was the wagon's obvious abandonment that spoke to him, or maybe it was the way everyone else seemed to walk past it without a second glance. But he stood there studying its broken frame, seeing something of himself in its weathered boards. Bit of a fixer-upper, wouldn't you say? Tom turned to find Samuel Stoltzfus, the farm's owner, standing beside him. Samuel was what the locals called Amish through and through, beard without mustache, simple black clothes, and eyes that held both kindness and caution in equal measure. Tom had bought eggs from the Stoltzfus farm stand for years, and Samuel had always remembered to ask after Margaret. "Mr. Brennan," Samuel said, his voice softening with recognition. "I heard about Margaret. I'm sorry for your loss." Tom nodded, not trusting his voice. It was still hard to hear her name from other people's lips. Samuel gestured to the wagon. "This old thing came with the property when my father bought this land in 1961. Been in that same corner of the barn ever since. My wife Rebecca finally convinced me to clear it out. 60 years of storing nothing but dust and mice," she said. "Whose was it originally?" Tom asked, finding his voice. Samuel's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "That would be the Yoder place. You know the story?" Everyone in Lancaster County knew the story, or at least some version of it. In 1943, the entire Yoder family, Abraham, Ruth, and their 4 children had vanished without a trace. They'd left behind a prosperous farm, a barn full of animals, and a house with breakfast still on the table. The disappearance had caused such a scandal that even the typically insular Amish community had cooperated with the English police investigation. But no bodies were ever found. No explanation ever surfaced. "I heard they found blood in the barn," Tom said. Samuel shook his head. "Stories grow in the telling, Mr. Brennan. What they found was an empty farm and a mystery that's haunted this community for 80 years. This wagon was in their barn, along with everything else they left behind." The auction was starting now, the auctioneer's rapid-fire chant drawing crowds to the furniture section. Samuel excused himself to help with the proceedings, leaving Tom alone with the decrepit wagon. He should have walked away. Should have gone to look at something useful, something Margaret would have appreciated, but instead he found himself sitting on a hay bale beside the wagon. Wait, other items sold quickly. A beautiful oak table for $300, a quilt that sparked a bidding war that ended at $700. The sun climbed higher, and the crowd grew larger, but no one came for the wagon. It was nearly noon when the auctioneer, a jovial Englishman named Dale Morrison, whom Tom recognized from the local Rotary Club, finally made his way to the forgotten corner. "All right, folks, what do we have here?" Dale called out, though only a handful of people had followed him. "One genuine antique wagon, full of character. Who'll start us at 50 cents? The small crowd chuckled. Someone called out, "You'd have to pay me to haul that away." Tom raised his hand. Dale looked surprised but recovered quickly. "We have 50 cents from Mr. Brennan. Do I hear 75? Silence. 50 cents going once, going twice. Sold to Tom Brennan for 50 cents. Dale brought his gavel down with more enthusiasm than the sale warranted. "Tom, you've got yourself a real project there." As Tom filled out the paperwork and handed over 2 quarters to Samuel's teenage son, he heard the whispers. "That's the widower, Brennan. Poor man must be lost without Margaret. Why on earth would anyone want that old wreck?" But Tom didn't care what they thought, as he arranged for his nephew Bobby to help him haul the wagon home with his trailer that afternoon. He felt something he hadn't felt in 6 months. Purpose. It wasn't much, just the idea of fixing something broken, but it was something. Bobby arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, his oversized pickup truck and trailer, looking almost comical, next to the horse-drawn buggies. Bobby was 35, built like the construction worker he was, and had inherited the Brennan family gift for fixing things. He took one look at the wagon and whistled low. "Uncle Tom, no disrespect, but what were you thinking?" "I was thinking it needs fixing," Tom replied simply. "This doesn't need fixing, it needs last rites." Bobby walked around the wagon shaking his head. "The wood's rotted through in places, the iron fixtures are rusted solid, and I'm pretty sure that's actual Civil War era craftsmanship. This thing could be 150 years old." "Then it's lasted this long for a reason," Tom said. Bobby studied his uncle for a moment, then shrugged. "All right, let's load her up, but I'm going on record saying this is a terrible idea." Loading the wagon was a delicate operation. Every time they lifted a section, something creaked ominously, or pieces of rotted wood flaked off like old scrap. They managed it, securing it to the trailer with probably more straps than necessary. As they drove away from the Stoltzfors farm, Tom looked back at the wagon through his side mirror. In the afternoon light, tilted at just the right angle, he could almost see what it might have been, once sturdy, practical, carrying families to church or hauling harvest from the fields. Everything had a prime, a purpose, a time when it mattered. The trick was remembering that even after that time seemed past. They were halfway home when Bobby asked, "You know about the Yoder family, right? The ones who owned that wagon?" "I know they disappeared. My grandmother used to tell me stories," Bobby said, keeping his eyes on the road. "She said Abraham Yoder was different from the other Irish. He'd traveled in his youth before committing to the faith, spent time in Europe, learned languages, saw the world. When he came back and married Ruth, people said he brought secrets with him. What kind of secret? The kind that make a whole family disappear, Bobby said quietly. Grandma said there were rumors he'd helped people escape from Europe before the war got bad. Jews, intellectuals, anyone who saw what was coming. But that's just old gossip. They pulled into Tom's driveway, the wagon rattling behind them like old bones. Tom's house, a modest two-story colonial that Margaret had painted yellow because she said it looked cheerful, seemed to watch their arrival with empty windows. It took them another hour to unload the wagon into Tom's garage, a space that had been Margaret's domain for her gardening supplies and craft projects. Her things were still there, pushed to the sides now, making room for this new project. Bobby helped him get it settled on blocks, making sure it was stable. "You want help taking it apart?" Bobby asked, though his tone suggested he hoped the answer was no. "No, I'll manage. It'll give me something to do." Bobby looked like he wanted to say more, maybe something about grief and healthy coping mechanisms, but he just clapped Tom on the shoulder. "Call if you need anything, Uncle Tom. And I mean anything." After Bobby left, Tom stood in the garage, alone with his 50-cent purchase. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced around the wagon like tiny spirits. He ran his hand along one of the wagon's sides, feeling the rough grain of the aged wood. The stories locked in its fibers. That's when he noticed it. A section of the wagon bed that didn't quite match. The wood grain ran perpendicular to the surrounding boards, and there was a thin seam that had been carefully concealed with what looked like a mixture of sawdust and glue, now cracked with age. Tom retrieved his tools from the workbench, Margaret's label maker still identifying each drawer in her neat handwriting. He selected a thin pry bar and carefully worked it into the seam. The board resisted at first, then with a sound like a sigh, it lifted. Beneath was a compartment, no bigger than a shoebox, lined with oilcloth to protect against moisture. And inside the compartment was a leather journal, its cover worn soft with handling, and beneath that, wrapped in what had once been white silk, but was now yellow with age. A small painting. Tom lifted the journal first, opening it carefully. The first page bore an inscription in careful handwriting: "If you are reading this, then we are gone, and the truth must be told. I am Abraham Yoder, and this is my confession. May God forgive us for what we did, and may history remember why we did it." Tom's hands trembled as he turned the page. The entry was dated April 15th, 1943. "They came for the children today. Not our children, the hidden ones, the ones we've been protecting." Ruth wept as we told them they must go deeper into hiding. "The man who calls himself Smith says he can guarantee safe passage, but only if we cooperate, only if we give him what he wants. But how can we trade one life for another? Tomorrow, we must decide." Tom set the journal aside and unwrapped the painting with shaking fingers. It was small, maybe 8 inches by 10, painted with a master's touch. A woman's portrait, her eyes seeming to follow the viewer, her slight smile suggesting secrets. The style was familiar, though Tom couldn't place it, but it was the signature in the corner that made him sink onto Margaret's gardening stool. Tom sat in his garage until the sun disappeared behind the maple trees that Margaret had planted their first year in the house. The Rembrandt, if it was real, and every instinct in his body said it was, lay on his workbench like an accusation. The journal rested beside it, its pages calling to him, with the insistence of the dead demanding to be heard. He should call someone. The police, maybe, or a museum. His daughter Lisa was a lawyer. She'd know what to do. But instead, Tom found himself pulling Margaret's old reading chair from the corner, the one she'd sat in while he tinkered with his projects, offering commentary and coffee in equal measure. He positioned a lamp beside it and opened Abraham Yoder's journal to the second entry, April 16, 1943. "The man Smith returned today with 2 others. They wore the clothes of farmers, but moved like soldiers. Ruth saw it too. The way they catalogue our home, our barn, our children, they know we have it. Someone in Philadelphia told them, though I pray it wasn't Brother Marcus. He swore our secret was safe. They want the painting. The little portrait, Smith called it, as if its size diminished its import, as if we didn't risk everything to bring it here, to keep it from the hands of evil men who would use its sale to fund more death, more trains carrying innocents to their doom. Ruth says we should give it to them. It's just paint and canvas, she argues. The children are flesh and blood, but she doesn't understand. The painting is more than art, it's a promise. A promise to the Bernstein family that their grandmother's portrait, the last remnant of their heritage, will survive this madness. That when this war ends, and it must end, something of beauty will remain. The hidden children grow restless in the root cellar. Little Sarah coughs constantly. We've told our own children they're sick cousins from Ohio, but children know when adults lie. Our eldest Jonas watches me with eyes too, knowing for his 14 years. Tom looked up from the journal, his heart racing. Hidden children. A root cellar. His mind went to the stories he'd heard over the years about the Underground Railroad. But this was different. This was 1943. This was about a different kind of escape, a different kind of persecution. He returned to the journal. April 17, 1943. Today I write with a heavy heart and a clear conscience. We have made our decision. Smith came at dawn, no longer pretending civility. He held a gun to Ruth's head while his men held our children. The painting, he said, or I start with the youngest. Our youngest, Mary, is 4 years old. She still sings to her cloth doll, still believes the world is good. I told him the painting was hidden in the old Brennan mine, 2 miles north. I gave him detailed directions, drew him a map. His greed overcame his caution. He left one man to watch us while he and the other went to retrieve it. The man he left was young, nervous. When the children in the cellar began crying, Sarah's cough had worsened. He went to investigate the sound. Jonas and I overpowered him. We had no choice in what came next. Ruth says God will understand. I pray she's right. We leave tonight, all of us, our family and the 7 children we've been hiding. Brother Marcus has arranged everything. By the time Smith returns from the mine, we'll be gone. The children will be placed with families in Canada. We will disappear into the English world, become the very thing we've spent our lives apart from. It's the only way to keep them safe. I leave this record hidden in the wagon we cannot take, along with the painting they seek. Let history judge whether we chose correctly. We traded our faith, our community, our way of life for 7 young souls whose only crime was being born to the wrong families in the wrong country at the wrong time. If you find this, please know we were not cowards who ran. We were parents who chose life over tradition, love over law. May God forgive us all. Abraham Yoder. Tom's hands shook as he turned the page, but the rest of the journal was different. Pages filled with what looked like accounting records in German, lists of names with amounts beside them, and near the back, pressed between pages like dried flowers, 7 photographs. They were small, passport-sized, showing children of various ages. On the back of each, written in different hands, were names and dates. Sarah Bernstein, age 8, Berlin 1941. Marcus and David Goldberg, ages 10 and 12, Frankfurt 1942. Rebecca Weiss, age 7, Munich 1941, ages 9 and 11, Hamburg 1942. Elizabeth Schwartz, age 6, Vienna 1941. Tom set the journal down and picked up his phone, then set it down again. He walked to the house, poured himself 3 fingers of the whiskey Michael had given him for Christmas, and walked back to the garage. The painting watched him from the workbench, the woman's eyes following him with that Rembrandt magic of seeming alive. He thought about calling Bobby, but his nephew would want to do the right thing immediately. Call the authorities, contact the media, turn this into a story, a sensation. But Tom had lived long enough to know that sensations had a way of losing the human element. This wasn't just about a valuable painting. This was about sacrifice, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. His phone buzzed. Lisa calling. He let it go to voicemail. Tom carefully rewrapped the painting and returned it to its hiding place in the wagon, along with the journal. Then he did something that would have made Margaret proud. He went to his computer and started researching. It took him 3 hours to find what he was looking for. Sarah Bernstein hadn't been a common name, but Sarah Bernstein Morrison was. She was living in Toronto, a retired professor of European history, age 88. There was even a faculty photo from 2010 showing a dignified woman with eyes that, even in the pixelated image, looked familiar. It was past 11 when Tom finally worked up the courage to call the number he'd found. It rang 4 times before a woman answered. "Hello?" The voice was elderly, but clear, with just a trace of an accent. "Mrs. Morrison? Sarah Bernstein Morrison?" A pause. "Who is this?" "My name is Tom Brennan. I live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I bought something at an auction today. A wagon. I think it might have belonged to Abraham Yoder." The silence stretched so long Tom thought she'd hung up. Then, in a whisper, "Abraham Yoder is a name I haven't heard in many, many years. Did he, Mr. Brennan? I don't know who you are, or what you want, but I found a journal," Tom said quickly, "and photographs. 7 children's photographs. One of them is labeled Sarah Bernstein, age 8, Berlin 1941. This time the silence was different, filled with the weight of decades. "I was 8, she finally said. 8 years old when my parents sent me away with a cousin who was fleeing to America. The cousin was caught in Philadelphia and sent back. I was lucky. A Quaker family found me, hid me, and eventually got me to the Yoders. They were not supposed to help. The Amish, they stay apart from the world's troubles. But Abraham and Ruth, they couldn't turn us away." "There were 7 of you? 7 children in that cellar?" "Yes. We stayed there for 3 months. Ruth would bring us food, teach us English, tell us Bible stories even though we were Jewish. She said God's love didn't check paperwork. Abraham would come at night, teaching us how to milk cows and plant seeds, preparing us for our new lives as farm children in Canada." Tom could hear her crying now, soft sounds of old grief made fresh. "What happened to them? To the Yoders?" "They saved us," Sarah said simply. "When those men came, we never knew who they really were, but Abraham thought they were Nazi sympathizers, war profiteers. The Yoders chose us over everything. They gave up their faith, their community, their home. They became English, changed their names, scattered to the wind, all to keep us safe. Do you know where they went? Abraham and Ruth went west, I heard. Became the Millers. Their children grew up English. Jonas, the eldest, he wrote to me once in the 1960s. Said his parents never regretted their choice. Said they found God in the world just as surely as they'd found him in their community." Tom looked at the wagon, seeing it now for what it truly was, not just broken wood and rusted iron, but an ark that had carried impossible hope through impossible times. "Miss Morrison, there's something else. There's a painting. The Rembrandt," she breathed. "My grandmother. It was all my family could grab when they fled. Grandmother had been a patron of the arts, you see. She'd sat for Rembrandt himself as a young woman. The painting stayed in our family for 300 years. My parents gave it to the cousin to sell for our passage, but when the Yoders learned what it was, what it meant," she paused, "Abraham said it belonged to us, not to men who would use it for evil. He hid it. Even from us he hid it, so we couldn't be forced to tell. It's here," Tom said. "It's safe." Sarah began crying in earnest now. 80 years, she managed. 80 years I've wondered what became of it. Not because of its value, you understand, but because it was her, my grandmother, the only piece of my family's past that survived. "It belongs to you," Tom said without hesitation. "I'll bring it to you. Mr. Brennan, that painting must be worth I know what it's worth, Tom interrupted gently. It's worth 7 children's lives. It's worth a family's sacrifice. It's worth your grandmother's memory. Money doesn't enter into it. They talked for another hour. Sarah told him about the other children, how they'd all survived, grown up, had families of their own. The Goldberg brothers became doctors. Rebecca Weiss founded a charity for refugee children. The Roth siblings opened a bakery that still operated in Montreal. Elizabeth Schwartz became a teacher, then a principal, dedicating her life to education. We called ourselves the Cellar Children, Sarah said. We met every year on April 17th, the day the Yoders saved us. The others are gone now. I'm the last one, but our children know the story. Our grandchildren too. There are 43 descendants of the 7 children Abraham and Ruth Yoder saved. 43 lives that exist because an Amish couple chose love over law. When Tom finally hung up, it was past 1 in the morning. He sat in Margaret's chair, looking at the wagon in the dim garage light. He thought about Margaret, about how she would have loved this story. She would have cried at the right parts, would have immediately started planning how to reunite the painting with Sarah, would have wanted to document everything for posterity. You would have known what to do, Maggie, he said to the empty garage. You always did. But even as he said it, he realized he did know what to do. Maybe that's why he'd been drawn to the wagon in the first place. Not because he needed something to fix, but because sometimes the broken things choose us, call to us across time and space, asking us to complete their stories. Tom stood and walked to his workbench. He pulled out a fresh notebook, one of Margaret's with her name embossed on the cover, and began to write. He documented everything, the auction, the discovery, his conversation with Sarah. He photographed the journal pages, the children's pictures, the painting, not for sensation, not for profit, but for history, for the 43 descendants who deserve to know the full truth of their salvation. As he worked, he thought he felt Margaret beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice in his ear. This is why you were there today, Thomas. Not to find something worth millions, but to find something worthwhile. The sun was beginning to rise when Tom finally stopped writing. He'd filled 30 features with his careful handwriting, creating a bridge between past and present, between sacrifice and gratitude, between loss and purpose. He looked at the wagon one more time, seeing in its broken boards the same thing Abraham Yoder must have seen in those 7 frightened children, something worth saving, something worth sacrificing for, something worth remembering. Tom didn't sleep that night. As the sun painted Lancaster County gold, he stood in his kitchen, making coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The magnitude of what he'd discovered sat on his shoulders like a physical weight. A Rembrandt worth perhaps $100 million, a Holocaust rescue story that had been hidden for 80 years. 7 children saved, a family destroyed, and reborn. His phone had been buzzing all morning. 3 calls from Lisa, 2 from Michael, and 1 from Bobby. He'd texted them all the same message. I'm fine, just working on a project. We'll call later. But first he had work to do. Tom drove to the Lancaster County Library, a beautiful old building where Margaret had volunteered for 15 years. The head librarian, Dorothy Chen, looked up in surprise when he walked through the doors at opening time. Tom Brennan, she said warmly, coming around the desk to embrace him. I've missed seeing you here. Margaret and Tom used to come every Saturday. Margaret for her volunteer shift, Tom to read newspapers from around the world in the international section. It had been their routine for so long that being here without her felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Dorothy, I need help with some research, Tom said. Historical records. 1943. The Yoder family. Dorothy's expression shifted. The disappearance. Tom, researchers have been through those records dozens of times. There's even a true crime podcast about it now. Rather sensational, if you ask me. I'm looking for something different, Tom said. Immigration records. Specifically, anyone named Miller, who came to Lancaster County from elsewhere in Pennsylvania in 1943 or 1944. And he hesitated, then continued, any records of Jewish refugee children being placed in Canada around the same time? Dorothy studied him for a long moment. This is about that wagon you bought at the Stoltzfus auction, isn't it? The whole town's talking about it. Edna Kaufman said you looked like a man possessed when you bought it. Tom couldn't help but smile. The Lancaster County Gossip Network was more efficient than the internet. Something like that, he said. Can you help me? Dorothy led him to the archive room, a climate-controlled space in the basement that smelled of old paper and possibility. She set him up with boxes of records, immigration documents and newspaper clippings from Tom, she said before leaving him to his research. Margaret would be proud of you for whatever this is. She always said you had the heart of a historian, just waiting for the right story to tell. For the next 4 hours, Tom immersed himself in the past. He found fragments, pieces of a puzzle scattered across decades. A mention in the Mennonite Central Committee records of 7 children being relocated to Canada in May 1943, sponsored by anonymous benefactors. A wedding announcement from 1962 in Spokane, Washington, for Jonas Miller, son of Daniel and Mary Miller, formerly of Pennsylvania. Daniel and Mary had Abraham and Ruth taken the English translations of their names. Then he found it, buried in a 1943 police report about the disappearance, a detail that had meant nothing at the time but now made his blood run cold. 3 men were seen at the Yoder farm the day before the disappearance. They drove a black Plymouth sedan with Philadelphia plate. A neighbor, Eli Lapp, reported hearing what sounded like a struggle and a single gunshot around 8 p.m. But when questioned further, he retracted his statement, claiming it might have been a hunter. A gunshot. Tom thought of Abraham's journal entry about overpowering the guard. We had no choice in what came next. His phone rang, startling him from his research. It was a number he didn't recognize with a Toronto area code. Mr. Brennan, this is David Morrison, Sarah's son. My mother called me last night after speaking with you. David's voice was cautious, professional. Tom could hear the lawyer in it. She was quite emotional, David continued. She told me about your discovery, about the painting. Mr. Brennan, I need to be frank with you. My mother is elderly and has heart problems. This excitement, and there are other concerns. A painting of that value, that provenance, there will be claims on it. The Austrian government has been trying to reclaim Nazi-looted art for decades. There could be other family members with claims. This could become very complicated very quickly. What are you saying? I'm saying that perhaps it would be better if the painting remained undiscovered, at least until we can determine the best course of action. My mother doesn't need the stress of a legal battle at her age. Tom thought about it for a moment. With respect, Miss Morrison, I don't think that's your mother's wish. She seemed very clear about wanting to see her grandmother's portrait again. Mr. Brennan, you don't understand what you're dealing with. That painting, if it's authenticated, isn't just worth $100 million. It could be worth more. The art world would go insane. The media would descend on all of us. My mother's story, the Yoder family's sacrifice, it would all become a circus. Then we don't let it become a circus, Tom said firmly. Your mother deserves to see that painting. The story deserves to be told correctly, and the Yoder family deserves to have their sacrifice honored, not sensationalized. There was a long pause. You sound very certain, for someone who just stumbled onto this yesterday. My wife died 6 months ago, Tom said, surprising himself with his candor. She spent her whole life believing that stories matter, that connecting people to their past matters. I bought that wagon because I needed something broken to fix, but maybe it's not the wagon that needs fixing. Maybe it's the story. Maybe it's making sure the truth gets told the right way. David's tone softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Brennan. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to protect my mother. And frankly, to protect you. Once word gets out about that painting, your life is going to change dramatically. I'm 68 years old, Mr. Morrison. Change doesn't scare me anymore. Loss does. And your mother has lost enough. She should see her grandmother's portrait while she still can. David sighed. You're right, of course you're right. Mom's been talking about that painting my whole life. About her grandmother, who was brave enough to sit for Rembrandt, who was a patron of the arts when women weren't supposed to be anything but wise. She named me David after the Goldberg brothers, who were in that cellar with her. Marcus and David Goldberg, Tom said, looking at his notes. They became doctors. Marcus died in 2015, David said. But he had 4 children, 12 grandchildren. David died in 3 children, 8 grandchildren. All because your Abraham Yoder chose them over a painting worth a fortune. He chose them over everything, Tom corrected. The painting, his faith, his community, his home, everything. Mom wants to come to Lancaster County, David said suddenly. I told her she's not strong enough for the trip, but she's insisting. She says she needs to see the wagon, the journal, the painting. She needs to touch something the Yoders touched. She's Mr. Brennan. She's been carrying survivor's guilt for 80 years. She thinks if she can somehow thank them, even their memory, she can finally let it go. Tom thought about his own guilt, the weight of being the one who survived when Margaret didn't. Then bring her. I'll make arrangements. There's a good hotel nearby, the Lancaster Inn. I'll book rooms. We can book our own. Please, Tom interrupted. Let me do this. It's what my Margaret would have done. That afternoon, Tom drove to the Stoltzfus farm. He needed to know more about the wagon, about how it had sat in that barn for 60 years without anyone knowing its secret. Samuel was in the field with his sons, but he walked over when he saw Tom's truck. Mr. Brennan, Samuel said, wiping his hands on his work pants. How's that wagon treating you? It's revealing its secrets, slowly. Tom said carefully, Samuel, what do you know about the Yoder farm? Not the stories, but the facts. Samuel looked uncomfortable. Why do you ask? Because I found something in the wagon, something that suggests the Yoders didn't just disappear. They ran, they had to run, and I think your father might have known more than he ever said. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then gestured toward the barn. Come with me. They walked into the cool darkness of the barn, the smell of hay and animals familiar and comforting. Samuel led him to a corner office, really just a desk and filing cabinet that looked as old as the barn itself. My father kept everything, Samuel said, pulling out a key from behind a loose board. He unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and withdrew a manila envelope, yellow with age. He told me never to open this unless someone came asking the right questions about the Yoders. In 60 years, you're the first. Tom opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, dated June 1, 1943. Dear Mr. Stoltzfus, by the time you read this, we will be gone. I'm sorry to leave you with the burden of our land and our secret, but you are a good man and I trust you to do what is right. The wagon in our barn contains something that must be kept safe, not for its monetary value, but for what it represents. One day someone will come for it. They will be worthy of it, or they will not. I trust God to guide them to it when the time is right. Please do not think ill of us. We did what we had to do to save innocent lives. The man who died on our property was evil, and his death was necessary to prevent 7 children from being returned to certain death. His body is in the old well behind the abandoned Brennan mine. His companions will search, but they will not find him. We go now into the English world, not by choice, but by necessity. Pray for us, old friend, as we will pray for you. Abraham Yoder. P.S. If Sarah Bernstein survives this war, if she grows to adulthood, she may one day come looking for her heritage. Tell her we loved her as our own. Tom looked up to find Samuel watching him intently. My father never told anyone, Samuel said quietly. He bought their land, maintained it, waited. When he died, he passed the secret to me. I've been waiting too, though I never knew what I was waiting for. There's a body in the Brennan mine well, Tom asked. Was, Samuel corrected. My father and brothers filled in that well in 1955. Said it was a hazard. But really I think he was giving that man a proper burial, even if he didn't deserve one. Tom showed Samuel the journal, the photographs, explained about Sarah and the painting. Samuel's eyes widened with each revelation. A Rembrandt, he breathed. In my barn for 60 years. God truly works in mysterious ways. Sarah is coming to Lancaster County, Tom said. She needs to see where she was hidden, where the Yoders lived. Would that be possible? Samuel nodded slowly. The old Yoder house is still standing. We use it for storage now, but the root cellar is unchanged. She can see it all. As Tom drove home, his phone rang. It was Lisa. Dad, where have you been? I've been worried sick. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've been discovering something. Bobby told me about the wagon. Dad, please tell me you're not becoming a hoarder. I know losing Mom has been hard, but Lisa, I need you to come home this weekend. You and Michael both. There's something I need to tell you, something I need your help with. Dad, you're scaring me. Are you sick? No, I'm not sick. I'm more alive than I've been in 6 months. Just trust me. Can you come? Lisa agreed, though Tom could hear the worry in her voice. After he hung up, he sat in his garage again, looking at the wagon. He'd started the day thinking he was uncovering a simple historical mystery, but now he understood he was part of something larger, a story that spanned decades, continents, faiths, and families. His phone buzzed with a text from David Morrison. We'll be there Friday. Mom insists on bringing something for the Stoltzfus family. She says debts must be acknowledged, even if they can't be repaid. Tom smiled, thinking Margaret would have liked Sarah Bernstein Morrison. They both understood that stories were really about connections, the invisible threads that bind us across time and space, tragedy and triumph. That evening, as the sun set over Lancaster County, Tom began the delicate work of fully excavating the wagon's secret. He found 3 more hidden compartments. One contained American dollars and German Reichsmarks, emergency funds for a flight that came too late. Another held identity papers for all 6 Yoder family members under the name Miller, expertly forged and never used. The last compartment held a child's rag doll, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. On the doll's foot, embroidered in tiny stitches, was a name, Sarah. Tom held the doll gently, imagining Ruth Yoder saving it, hiding it, hoping someday to return it to the little girl who'd left it behind in her rush to safety. 80 years it had waited in the dark, a testament to a mother's love for children who weren't even her own. He photographed everything, documented each discovery, building the complete story piece by piece. This wasn't just about a valuable painting anymore. This was about bearing witness, about ensuring that sacrifice wasn't forgotten, that courage was remembered, that love, the kind that transcends blood and faith and nation, was honored. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, the kind of Indian summer day that Margaret used to call God's apology for winter. Tom had been up since 4 a.m., unable to sleep, going over every detail of the preparation. The Lancaster Inn had been booked, the Stoltzfus family notified, and his own children were arriving by noon. He'd spent Thursday cleaning the house in a way he hadn't since Margaret's funeral. Not just tidying, but deep cleaning, as if Sarah Bernstein Morrison's visit was somehow a visit from history itself, demanding respect and reverence. He'd even cleaned Margaret's chair in the garage, though he couldn't say why that felt important. At 10 a.m. Lisa arrived first, pulling into the driveway in her sensible Volvo, looking every inch the successful lawyer she'd become. She hugged him longer than usual, studying his face when she pulled back. Dad, you look different. How so? I don't know. Alive, I guess. Like you have a purpose again. Before Tom could respond, Michael's rental car pulled up, His son had flown in from Seattle, taking time away from his tech startup, and Tom felt a surge of gratitude that both his children had come without demanding explanations first. They gathered in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Margaret had served countless family meals, where homework had been argued over, where life had been lived in all its messy glory. "Okay, Dad," Michael said, pouring coffee for everyone. "What's this about?" Tom told them everything: the auction, the wagon, the journal, the painting, Sarah's story, the Yoder family's sacrifice. He showed them the photographs he'd taken, the documentation he'd compiled. He watched their expressions shift from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. "A Rembrandt," Lisa whispered. "Dad, do you understand what this means?" "The legal implications alone. The legal implications are secondary," Tom said firmly. "This is about doing what's right." "But Dad," Michael interjected, "we're talking about a painting worth maybe $100 million. Maybe more. There will be competing claims, authentication requirements, insurance issues." "I know all that," Tom said. "That's why I need your help. Lisa, I need you to research the legal precedents. Figure out how to ensure Sarah gets her grandmother's painting without it becoming a circus. Michael, I need you to help me document everything digitally, create a record that can't be disputed or sensationalized." Lisa was already pulling out her laptop. "There's precedent for this. The Monuments Men cases, the Austrian restitution. If we can prove direct lineage and that the painting was hidden to prevent Nazi looting, the story's more important than the painting," Tom insisted. 7 children lived because Abraham Yoder chose their lives over wealth. 43 descendants exist today because of that choice. That's the story that needs to be told. Michael was looking at his father with an expression Tom had never seen before. "Mom would have loved this." "She would have," Tom agreed, his throat tightening. "She always said the best stories were the ones about ordinary people doing extraordinary things." They spent the next 2 hours planning, researching, preparing. Lisa made calls to colleagues who specialized in art repatriation law. Michael set up a digital archive system and began scanning all of Tom's documentation. They worked with the kind of synchronized efficiency that only comes from being family, from knowing each other's rhythms and strengths. At 2 p.m., Tom's phone rang. It was David Morrison. "We're here," he said, checked into the hotel. "My mother, Mr. Brennan. She hasn't slept. She keeps talking about the Yoders, about the cellar, about a doll she left behind." "I found the doll," Tom said quietly. "It was in the wagon." He heard David relay this to his mother, heard her cry out, a sound of joy and grief, intermingled. "Can we come now?" David asked. "She says she can't wait any longer." Tom gave them directions to his house. After he hung up, he looked at his children. "They're coming. We'll give you space," Lisa offered, but Tom shook his head. "No. Stay. This is Margaret's house too. Our family's house. This story, it's becoming part of our story now." 20 minutes later, a silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. David Morrison got out first, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. He went immediately to the passenger side, helping out a tiny woman who moved with the careful deliberation of age, but whose eyes were sharp and bright with anticipation. Sarah Bernstein Morrison was dressed elegantly in a navy blue dress with a strand of pearls, her white hair perfectly styled. But it was her eyes that caught Tom's attention, eyes that had seen horror and miracle in equal measure, eyes that had waited 80 years for this moment. Tom met them at the door. Sarah reached out and took his hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her accent more pronounced in person. "You have given me a gift beyond measure, the chance to say thank you." "The gift isn't from me," Tom said gently. "It's from the Yoders. I'm just the messenger." He led them into the living room, where Lisa and Michael stood to greet them. Sarah's eyes went immediately to a photograph on the mantel, Tom and Margaret on their 40th wedding anniversary. "Your wife?" she asked. "Margaret. She passed 6 months ago." Sarah walked to the photograph, studied it. She had kind eyes. The Yoders had eyes like that. Eyes that saw beyond circumstance to possibility. "Would you like to see the wagon?" Tom asked. Sarah nodded, but David looked concerned. "Mom, maybe you should rest first." "I'm 88 years old, David. Rest is all I have left. But this is living." Tom led them to the garage. Sarah stopped in the doorway, her hand going to her heart as she saw the wagon broken, weathered, but somehow magnificent in its survival. "I remember it," she whispered. "Abraham would hide us in it sometimes when English visitors came to the farm. He'd pile hay on top, and we'd lie still as mice, breathing through cracks in the wood." She moved forward slowly, running her hands along its sides. "Ruth would sing to cover any sounds we might make. Hymns in German. I still know all the words." Tom retrieved the journal, the photographs, and finally, carefully, the doll. When he placed it in Sarah's hands, she broke down completely, clutching it to her chest as David held her. "I thought I would never see her again," she sobbed. "My mother made this doll. It was all I had of home. But that last night when we had to run, I dropped her in the cellar. Jonas, brave Jonas, wanted to go back for her, but Abraham said there was no time. Ruth saved it," Tom said, "hid it in the wagon, hoping to return it to you someday." Sarah looked up at him, through her tears. "They saved everything. Our lives, our futures, our memories. How do you repay something like that?" "You live," Lisa said suddenly, speaking for the first time. "You live, and you thrive, and you tell the story. That's the repayment." Sarah studied Lisa, then smiled. "You are your father's daughter, and your mother's, I think." "The painting," David prompted gently. "Mom, do you want to see the painting?" Tom retrieved it from its hiding place, unwrapping it with infinite care. As the last of the silk fell away, Sarah gasped. "Bubby," she breathed, using the Yiddish word for grandmother. "Oh, Bubby." The portrait seemed to glow in the afternoon light streaming through the garage window. The woman in the painting looked back at them across centuries, her slight smile suggesting she knew secrets about time and survival that she would never tell. "She was 22 when this was painted," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "Her name was Rebecca Bernstein, nee Levy. She was a widow. Her first husband died young, and she used his fortune to support artists, musicians, writers. In 1642, that was scandalous. A young Jewish widow patronizing the arts, sitting for portraits. But she didn't care about scandal. She cared about beauty, about preserving light in a dark world." Sarah reached out, not quite touching the painting. "My mother told me Bubby would have loved the irony. Her portrait hidden in an Amish wagon, saved by people who don't believe in graven images, waiting 80 years to be found by an English widower who bought it for 50 cents. It belongs to you," Tom said. "It always has." Sarah shook her head. "Mr. Brennan, that painting is worth. I know what it's worth, and I know what's worthwhile. They're not the same thing." Lisa stepped forward. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm an attorney. I can help ensure the painting is returned to you with minimal fuss. There are ways to do this quietly, respectfully, and I can help document everything digitally," Michael added. "Create a record that honors the story without sensationalizing it." Sarah looked around the garage, at the wagon, at Tom's family, at the painting. The Yoders gave up everything for strangers. Now strangers are giving everything back. The circle closes, not strangers. Tom corrected. "Not anymore." David had been quiet, but now he spoke. "Mr. Brennan, there's something else. The other families, the descendants of the 7 children, they should know. They should have the chance to be part of this." Tom nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. Samuel Stoltzfus has offered to let us visit the old Yoder farm, see the root cellar. Maybe we could gather them all." Sarah's eyes lit up. "A reunion. The cellar children's descendants. Yes, it must happen." But she looked troubled. What about the Yoders? Abraham and Ruth descendants. They should be there too. I found Jonas, Tom said, pulling out his research. Jonas Miller, formerly Yoder. He died in 2018, but he had children. They're in Washington state. Then we'll find them, Sarah said with determination. We'll bring them home. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Lisa took charge of the legal aspects, already making calls to colleagues. Michael began reaching out through social media and genealogy sites, tracking down the descendants. David helped his mother make calls to the families she still knew about. By evening they had located 31 of the 43 descendants. The responses were overwhelming: shock, joy, disbelief, and universal agreement. They would come to Lancaster County. They would bear witness. As the sun began to set, Samuel Stoltzfus arrived. Tom had called him, and the Amish man had insisted on coming to meet Sarah. He entered the garage, hat in hand, his presence both foreign and familiar in Tom's English world. "Mrs. Morrison," he said simply, "I'm Samuel Stoltzfus. My father kept your secret. My family has been waiting for you for 60 years. Sarah stood and took his hands. "Stoltzfus, your father's kindness, his discretion, was what any good man would do," Samuel interrupted gently. "But there's more. My father left something else. A letter from Ruth Yoder. She sent it in 1973, just before she passed. My father never opened it. It was addressed to the 7 children. I think perhaps it was meant for you." He pulled out an envelope from his jacket, aged but intact. Sarah took it with trembling hands and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Ruth's careful handwriting. "To my dear children of the cellar, Abraham passed 5 years ago, and I feel my own time drawing near. We never forgot you. Not one day passed that we didn't pray for you, wonder about you, hope for you. People ask us if we regret our choice, leaving our faith and community. How can we regret choosing life? You were not our children by blood, but you became our children by choice. And that is sometimes stronger. We learned that you all survived, that you thrived. Samuel Stoltzfus has been our secret window to the world, bringing us news when he could. We know about your families, your successes, your joys. We are so proud. Our own children grew up English, never fully understanding why we left our faith, but knowing it was for love. They are good people, though scattered now like seeds on the wind. If you are reading this, then the time for secrets has passed. Please know this. You were worth everything we gave up. 7 lives saved, countless more born from those 7. That is our legacy, not the farm we left or the faith we stepped away from, but you. In the cellar you learned that love has no boundaries of faith or blood. We learned it too. God is bigger than any one way of believing, and love is his true commandment. Be well, dear ones. Live fully, love freely. Remember us, not with sadness, but with joy. All our love, Ruth and Abraham in spirit. There wasn't a dry eye in the garage. Even Samuel, stoic Samuel, wiped at his cheeks. We'll gather them all, Sarah said finally, her voice strong with purpose. Every descendant, every connection. We'll meet at the farm, see the cellar, tell the story properly. And the painting, she looked at the Rembrandt. Then at Tom. The painting will go to a museum with the full story. Let the world know that in the darkest times there were points of light, Amish farmers who chose mercy over doctrine, children who survived, families who endured. The proceeds, David asked practically. A foundation, Sarah said immediately, for refugee children. The Yoder Foundation. Let their sacrifice continue saving lives. Tom felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the grief that had gripped him for 6 months. This was what Margaret would have done, turned sorrow into purpose, loss into legacy. I have one condition, Tom said. Everyone looked at him. The wagon stays here. It's not finished telling its stories, and I'm not finished fixing it. Sarah smiled, the years falling away from her face. Mr. Brennan, I think Abraham Yoder would say that some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be honored exactly as they are, broken but beautiful, weathered but worthy. As the evening deepened, they moved into the house. Lisa ordered Chinese food, Margaret's favorite, and they ate together like an unlikely family brought together by time and chance and courage. Sarah told stories of the cellar, of Ruth teaching them English with patience and humor, of Abraham showing them how to milk cows while telling them they were learning skills for their new lives in the North. He never said Canada, Sarah remembered, always the North, like it was a mythical mythil where children could be safe. And for us, it was. Michael had his laptop out, documenting everything, recording Sarah's stories with her permission. This needs to be preserved, he said. Not for money or fame, but for history. For the future, Sarah corrected. So people know that goodness exists, even in the worst times, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love demands it. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Tom's house became command central for what the growing group had begun calling the Gathering. Lisa had taken a leave of absence from her firm, setting up a makeshift office in Tom's dining room where she handled the complex legal negotiations with quiet efficiency. Michael had extended his stay, creating a digital archive that would eventually become a permanent historical record. But it was the phone calls that transformed Tom's quiet house into something alive again. Every day brought new connections, descendants calling from across the continent, each with their own piece of the story. There was Rachel Goldberg Foster, granddaughter of Marcus, calling from Boston. My grandfather never talked about it until he was dying. Then he told me everything. He said a family named Yoder gave him life twice, once by saving him, and again by showing him that goodness existed even in hell. Samuel Roth's son Jonathan called from Montreal, the bakery my father and aunt started. They called it Northern Lights. I never understood why until now. It was because Abraham Yoder called Canada the North, where the lights dance. Dad said it gave them hope in that cellar, thinking about lights dancing somewhere safe. Elizabeth Schwartz's daughter Anna called from Chicago, weeping. My mother taught kindergarten for 40 years. She said she owed the world thousands of children's smiles because strangers had saved hers. But the most unexpected call came on a Tuesday evening. Tom was in the garage, carefully cleaning the wagon's iron fixtures with a solution. Margaret had taught him years ago when his phone rang. Is this Thomas Brennan? The voice was male, elderly, hesitant. Yes, who's calling? My name is Daniel Miller. I think you've been looking for me. I was born Jonas Yoder. Tom nearly dropped the phone. Jonas, Abraham and Ruth's eldest? Yes, a long pause. I'm 94 years old, Mr. Brennan. I thought I would take our family secret to my grave. But my grandson saw something on the internet, a social media post your son made, about a wagon and a painting and 7 children my parents saved. It's all true, Tom said. I have your father's journal, your mother's letter. The painting they hid. Sarah Bernstein is here. She's alive and she remembers everything. Tom heard the old man crying across 3,000 miles of distance and 8 decades of silence. Little Sarah, Jonas whispered. She had the biggest eyes, so frightened all the time except when Mother sang to her. Is she well? She's 88 and magnificent, Tom said. She became a professor. She has children, grandchildren. She never forgot your family. We never forgot them either. Every April 17th, no matter where we were, my parents would light 7 candles. They'd tell us it was for the children who lived. I was old enough to remember everything, but my siblings, we protected them from the full truth. Maybe that was wrong. Can you come to Lancaster County? Tom asked. The descendants are gathering. All of them. Your family should be there. Mr. Brennan, I'm 94. I use a walker. I haven't traveled in years. Then we'll make it possible, Tom said firmly. Whatever you need. Your parents gave up everything for those children. The least we can do is bring you home. Jonas was quiet for a moment. Home. Yes, I suppose Lancaster County was home once. Before we became the Millers, before we scattered like dandelion seeds. My children don't even know we were ever Amish. How do you tell your children that their grandparents were heroes who never wanted anyone to know? You tell them the truth, Tom said. That love demanded sacrifice, and your parents paid it without hesitation. 2 days later, Jonas Miller arrived at Philadelphia International Airport with his son Paul and daughter Ruth, named, he admitted, for the mother she never knew was once Amish. Tom and Sarah went to pick them up together, an unlikely pair united by purpose. The moment Jonas and Sarah saw each other in the airport arrival area was something Tom would never forget. They didn't speak at first, just looked at each other across the gulf of years. Then Sarah reached up. She was so tiny, and Jonas, even at 94, was still tall, and touched his face. "You tried to go back for my doll," she said. "You were so scared to leave it," Jonas replied. They embraced then, carefully aware of their fragile bones and the weight of time, while travelers streamed around them, oblivious to the historical reconciliation happening in their midst. On the drive back to Lancaster County, Jonas stared out the window at the familiar landscape transformed by time. "The old Brennan mine," he said suddenly, as they passed a historical marker. "That's where we sent them, where Father sent the men who came for the painting." "Is it still there?" "The well was filled in 1955, Tom said carefully. Jonas nodded slowly. "Father carried that death his whole life. He was a pacifist who killed to save children. The contradiction broke something in him, I think. He could never be fully Amish again, but he could never be fully English either. He existed in between, in a space without a name. He was a hero," Sarah said firmly from the back seat. "Heroes don't feel like heroes," Jonas replied. "They feel like people who did what they had to do and spend the rest of their lives wondering if there was another way." That evening, Tom hosted a dinner that would have made Margaret proud. His dining room, which had sat empty for 6 months, was full of life. Jonas and his children, Sarah and David, Lisa and Michael, even Samuel Stoltzfus and his wife Rebecca had come. The stories flowed like wine. Jonas told them about the night they fled, how his father had made him memorize a new name, a new birthday, a new history in case they were separated. He told them about their years of wandering, Pennsylvania to Ohio to Indiana, to finally Washington State, always moving when someone got too curious about their past. "We children adapted," Jonas said. "Children always do. But my parents, they grieved their lost faith every day. Not because they regretted saving the 7, but because they missed their community, their certainty, their God, who had once felt so close and then felt so complicated." Samuel Stoltzfus leaned forward. "Your parents' God never left them." "My father said so," he said. "Abraham Yoder found God in the world just as surely as he'd found him in the church. Different view, same presence." Rebecca Stoltzfus, who had been quiet all evening, suddenly spoke. "There's something else, something my mother-in-law told me before she died. She said Ruth Yoder sent her a letter once, years after they left. She said Ruth wrote, 'We thought we were saving 7 children, but really they saved us. They taught us that love is bigger than rules, that mercy is greater than doctrine, that God speaks all languages and hears all prayer.'" The room fell silent, everyone absorbing the weight of those words. Tom thought about Margaret then, about how she would have loved this moment, strangers becoming family, history becoming present, brokenness becoming beautiful. He excused himself and went to the garage, needing a moment alone with his thoughts and the wagon that had started it all. He found Lisa there, running her hands along the wagon sides. "Dad," she said without turning, "Mom would have been so proud of you." "I was just thinking the same about her, how she would have loved this." Lisa turned to face him and he saw she'd been crying. "Dad, I need to tell you something. The last time I talked to Mom, the week before she died, she was worried about you," she said. "If something happens to me, your father's going to need something to bring him back to life." She made me promise to help you find it. Tom felt his throat close. She always knew me better than I knew myself. I think she would say you knew exactly what you needed. Lisa, you just needed broken things to teach you that broken doesn't mean worthless. They stood together in comfortable silence until Michael appeared in the doorway. Hey, everyone's wondering where you went. Jonas wants to see the wagon. They returned to find the entire dinner party moving toward the garage. Jonas walked slowly, supported by his son, but his eyes were sharp and focused when he saw the wagon. My God, he breathed. Father's wagon. I learned to drive the horses with this wagon. Mother taught me to read sitting in its bed. He moved forward, touched a particular board. Here, I carved my initials here. J.Y. Jonas Yoder. His fingers found the tiny, barely visible letters. I got in so much trouble. Defacing property was a serious offense. Sarah joined him. Do you remember the songs your mother sang? When we were hiding. Jonas smiled. How does that one go? Gott ist die Liebe, lässt mich erlösen. Sarah joined in, her voice elderly but sweet. Gott ist die Liebe, liebt auch mich. God is love. Let me be redeemed. Jonas translated, God is love. He loves me too. Others began arriving as the week progressed. The Goldberg descendants from Boston and New York. The Roth family from Montreal, including the now famous Northern Lights bakery owners. The Weiss clan from California, where Rebecca's charity for refugee children had helped over 10,000 families in 40 years. Elizabeth Schwartz's children and grandchildren from Chicago, many of them teachers like she had been. Each family brought photographs, documents, stories. Michael worked 18-hour days, organizing everything into a comprehensive digital archive. Lisa coordinated with museums, historians, and documentary filmmakers who had gotten wind of the story, but she was fierce in her protection of the family's privacy, ensuring that any media coverage would be on their terms. 3 days before the planned gathering at the old Yoder farm, Tom received a call from authentication experts at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They had completed their preliminary examination of the painting. Mr. Brennan, the lead expert, Dr. Helena Morrison, no relation to Sarah, said with barely contained excitement, "This is not just a Rembrandt. This is a previously unknown Rembrandt, mentioned in historical documents, but thought lost for centuries. Conservative estimates place its value at $150 million, possibly more. This is one of the most significant art discoveries of the 21st century." Tom thanked her and hung up. He looked at the painting, which he'd moved to his house's safe for security. $150 million, enough to change lives, to secure futures, to buy almost anything. He thought about Abraham Yoder, who had looked at this same painting and seen not money but a promise to keep, who had chosen 7 frightened children over a fortune, who had hidden it not to preserve wealth, but to preserve faith. Faith that someday someone would find it and do the right thing. That evening, Tom called a meeting of all the descendants who had arrived. They gathered in the Lancaster Inn's conference room, 34 people ranging in age from Jonas at 94 to Sarah Goldberg Foster's grandson at just 18. The painting has been authenticated, Tom announced. The current valuation is $150 million. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations, but Tom raised his hand for silence. The question is, what do we do with it? Legally, it belongs to Sarah, as the only surviving child from the seller and the direct descendant of the original owner. But morally, ethically, spiritually, this decision affects all of us. Sarah stood slowly. I've thought about this every night since Tom found the painting. My grandmother, Rebecca Bernstein, was a patron of the arts because she believed beauty could heal the world. The Yoders believed love could save it. I want to honor both beliefs. She paused, looking around the room at all the faces, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the 7 who had hidden in terror in a root cellar, saved by a couple who chose mercy over safety. The painting will be sold. Sarah announced. The money will establish the Yoder Bernstein Foundation for Refugee Children. But more than that, we're going to tell this story. All of it. The courage, the sacrifice, the love that transcends faith and nationality, because that's the real treasure. Abraham and Ruth Yoder left us. The knowledge that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love demands it. Jonas struggled to his feet. My parents would be overwhelmed. They never wanted recognition. No, Sarah agreed, but they wanted the children to live. And now their sacrifice will help other children live. It's perfect symmetry. The vote was unanimous, even from David Morrison, who had initially worried about the complications. The painting would be sold, the foundation established, and the story would be told, not for sensation but for inspiration. The morning of October 17th, exactly 80 years and 6 months after the Yoders had fled with 7 children, dawned crisp and clear over Lancaster County. Tom stood at his bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the farmland gold, and thought about Margaret again. She would have been up already, making coffee for everyone, ensuring every detail was perfect for this day of remembrance. "I'm trying to do this right, Maggie," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying to honor all of it, their sacrifice, their love, your belief that stories matter." Downstairs, Lisa and Michael were already busy. They'd stayed at the house all week, and Tom had watched something shift between his children. The rivalry and distance of adulthood had melted away as they worked together on this project. They were siblings again, united in purpose. "Dad," Michael called up, "Samuel Stoltzfus is here." Tom found Samuel in the kitchen, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the English house, but determined to be present. "My wife and daughters have been cooking for 3 days," Samuel said. "We know your people are bringing food too, but we wanted to contribute. This gathering's part of our history too, the secret my family kept all these years. Thank you, Samuel, for everything." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else. The bishop wants to come." Bishop Lapp. His grandfather was Eli Lapp, the neighbor who reported hearing the gunshot that night in 1943. He says his family needs to seek forgiveness for not doing more, for retracting their statement to police. Tom was surprised. The Amish bishop wanting to attend an English gathering was almost unprecedented. Of course he's welcome. Everyone connected to this story is welcome. By noon, cars began arriving at the old Yoder farm. Samuel had worked with his sons all week to make the property accessible, mowing paths through the overgrown fields, stabilizing the old house's porch, ensuring the root cellar was safe to enter. They'd even restored the barn where the wagon had waited 80 years to tell its story. Tom arrived with Jonas and Sarah in his truck, the 2 elderly survivors sitting in the back seat, holding hands like the frightened children they'd once been. As they pulled up to the farm, both of them gasped. "It's exactly the same," Jonas breathed. "That maple tree, I used to climb it to watch for strangers. That's where the vegetable garden was, where Mother grew the food she shared with the hidden children. And there," his voice broke, "there's the path to the root cellar." Sarah was crying silently. "I can smell it. Isn't that strange? After 80 years, I can smell the farm hay and earth and Ruth's bread baking." The gathering was larger than expected. All 43 descendants had come, some traveling from as far as Alaska and Hawaii. There were historians from 3 universities, documentary filmmakers who had agreed to Tom's strict conditions about respectful coverage, representatives from the Holocaust Museum, and members of both the Amish and Mennonite communities. But it was the presence of Bishop Lapp that created the most stir. He was an elderly man, tall and austere in traditional Amish dress, his beard white as snow. He walked directly to Jonas and Sarah. "I am Bishop Ezekiel Lapp," he said formally. "My grandfather heard the gunshot the night your family saved these children. He was afraid, so he retracted his statement. He let fear silence truth. For this I ask your forgiveness." Jonas looked at the bishop for a long moment. "Your grandfather's silence helped save 7 children. If he had insisted on his statement, there would have been a deeper investigation. They might have found the body immediately, found the children. Sometimes, Bishop, fear serves God's purpose too. The bishop's stern face softened. You are gracious, Jonas Yoder, more gracious than we were to your family. The community should have understood, should have trusted, that Abraham knew God's will even if it led him away from our ways. Samuel Stoltzfus stepped forward. Bishop, with your permission, we'd like to hold a service here, not just Amish, but all of us, to honor what happened here. The bishop looked around at the diverse gathering, Jews and Christians, Amish and English, young and old. God speaks all languages, he said finally, echoing Ruth Yoder's long-ago words, let us worship together. But first, they would visit the cellar. Samuel led the way to a small mound near the house. The entrance was covered by an old wooden door, weathered but solid. Tom and Michael helped pull it open, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Samuel had installed temporary lighting for safety, but the weak bulbs only emphasized the cellar's cramped, primitive nature. Sarah stood at the entrance, trembling. David put his arm around her, but she shook her head. I need to do this. We all do. Jonas went first, his 94-year-old frame moving carefully down the steps. His 14-year-old self had descended countless times to bring food and comfort to hidden children. Sarah followed, then the other descendants, each carrying the weight of inherited memory. The cellar was smaller than Tom had imagined, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with a dirt floor and stone walls that wept moisture. The ceiling was so low that most adults had to stoop. 7 children had lived here for 3 months in darkness and fear, while above them a family risked everything to keep them safe. Here, Sarah said, pointing to a corner, this is where I slept, with Rebecca Weiss. We would hold each other when the fear got too bad. And here, she moved to another spot. This is where Ruth taught us English, whispering the words so quietly, we had to lean in to hear. Jonas pointed to crude drawings still visible on one wall. The children drew these with charcoal from the stove, pictures of the sun, trees, birds, everything they couldn't see. Mother never washed them off. She said they were prayers in picture form. Tom watched as the descendants explored the small space, some crying, others standing in silent contemplation. The Goldberg brothers' grandchildren stood in the spot where Marcus and David had slept. The Roth family gathered where Samuel and Anna had huddled, each family claiming their piece of sacred ground. We were so scared, Sarah said to the room. Every footstep above might be the police. Every voice might be someone coming to take us back to certain death. But Ruth would come down with her candles and her calm, and Abraham with his quiet strength. And somehow we believed we would survive. You did more than survive, Jonas said. You thrived. Look at all of you, doctors, teachers, business owners, artists. My parents would be so proud. Bishop Lapp, who had descended into the cellar despite the difficulty for a man his age, looked around at the cramped space and spoke in his deep, resonant voice. This is holy ground, not because miracles happened here, but because ordinary people chose love over law. This cellar is a testament to the truth that faith without works is dead, and the greatest work is love. They emerged from the cellar like pilgrims from a shrine, blinking in the afternoon sun. The Stoltzfus women had set up tables in the barn, laden with food, a mixture of Amish traditional dishes and foods brought by the descendants representing their various cultural traditions. The Northern Lights Bakery had brought challah and rogal. The Goldberg family brought food from their kosher deli. The Schwartz family brought Chicago deep dish pizza, which made everyone laugh. Mother would have loved this, Jonas said, surveying the multicultural feast. She always said heaven would be a potluck where everyone brought their best dish. After the meal, they gathered in the barn for the service. It was unlike anything Tom had ever experienced. Bishop Lapp read from the Bible in German. Sarah's grandson read from the Torah in Hebrew. A Mennonite pastor spoke about radical hospitality. Jonas's daughter Ruth, who had become a Methodist minister, Talked about her grandparents whom she'd never known were heroes until this week. Then Sarah stood to speak. At 88, tiny and frail-looking, she commanded the attention of everyone in the barn. "I want to tell you about Ruth Yoder," she began. "Not the hero you've been hearing about, but the woman who sang to scared children in the dark. She had a terrible voice. Oh, it was awful. She sang anyway, because she knew the sound of a mother's voice. Any mother's voice could push back fear. She taught us English using the Bible, not because she was trying to convert us, but because it was the only book she had multiple copies of. She would point to words and act them out. Love, she would hug us. Hope, she would point to the ceiling, toward sky we couldn't see. Faith, she would close her eyes and smile, teaching us that believing didn't require seeing. Abraham would come down in the evenings, after the farm work was done. His hands were so rough from work, but so gentle with us. He would tell us stories about Canada, about the northern lights dancing in the sky. He'd never seen them himself, but he painted such pictures with words that we could see them in our dark cellar, ribbons of green and gold and purple, dancing for free children. He gave us new names for our journey. I was to be Susan Brown, so American, so not Jewish. I practiced writing it over and over in the dirt floor. But Ruth told me, never forget Sarah Bernstein. Susan Brown is just a costume you wear for safety. Sarah Bernstein is who you are in your soul. The night we left, it was raining. I remember because Ruth wrapped us in oilcloth like packages. Abraham carried the youngest, Elizabeth and Jonas helped with the others. We walked for miles to meet the people who would take us north. At the handoff, Ruth kissed each of us, not on the forehead like a blessing, but on both cheeks like family. The last thing Abraham said to us was, "Live good lives. That's all we ask. Live good lives and remember that love is stronger than hate always." For 80 years, I've tried to live a good life. We all have. But we've carried guilt too. Guilt that a family was destroyed for us. That two people gave up everything they held dear so we could live. Today, in this barn, on this farm, I want to say what I couldn't say then. Thank you. Thank you, Abraham and Ruth. Thank you, Jonas, who was just a boy but helped save us. Thank you, Mary and Daniel, and little Samuel Yoder, who gave up your parents to the English world so we could live. Your sacrifice was not in vain. She sat down to complete silence, broken only by soft crying from various corners of the barn. Then Jonas stood, supported by his son. "I want to tell you what my parents never could. They found God again, not in a church or a community that looked like the one they left, but in the faces of every refugee they helped for the rest of their lives. They spent 30 years after the war helping displaced persons find homes in America. They sponsored 17 families, helped them get jobs, learn English, become citizens. It's a strange thing," Samuel said quietly. "My people don't believe in graven images, yet here we are, celebrating a painting. But I think I understand now. It's not about the image, it's about what it represents. The promise kept. The lives saved, the faith that transcends doctrine. Your father understood that," Tom said. "That's why he kept the secret all those years." "We're rebuilding the old Yoder house," Samuel said suddenly. "The community decided. We're going to make it a place of refuge, a safe house for those who need it. The bishop says it's our way of honoring what Abraham and Ruth did, of making sure their sacrifice continues to bear fruit." Tom smiled, thinking how perfect that was. The house that had hidden 7 children would continue to hide those in need. 3 days after the auction, Tom stood in his garage with the wagon. He'd decided not to restore it after all. Sarah had been right. Some things weren't meant to be fixed, but honored exactly as they were. But he was building something else, a wooden display case with a plaque that would tell the wagon's story. Lisa and Michael were there, helping him with the construction. They'd both extended their stays indefinitely, finding excuses not to return to their regular lives. Tom understood. They'd all been changed by this experience, made larger by their proximity to historical courage. "Dad," Lisa said. "I've been thinking. I want to leave corporate law. I want to work for the foundation full-time, help refugee families navigate the legal system, and I'm going to create an educational platform," Michael added. "Interactive exhibits that tell not just the Yoder story, but all the stories of ordinary people who stood against evil. Make sure young people understand that heroes aren't just in movies, they're in farmhouses and cellars, and wherever someone chooses love over fear." Tom looked at his children, Margaret's children, and saw her legacy continuing in ways neither of them could have dreamed. That night, unable to sleep, Tom sat in the garage with the wagon one last time before it would be moved to the Holocaust Museum, where it would become part of a permanent exhibit. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, a widower's impulse purchase that had revealed a historical treasure, reunited scattered families, and would fund the rescue of countless refugees. He pulled out a pen and paper and began to write a letter. "Dear Margaret, I know you're not really gone, not completely. I see you in Lisa's determination to seek justice, in Michael's passion for preserving truth, in baby Margaret Nazari's eyes, in the foundation that will save lives in your name. 6 months ago, I thought my story had ended with your. I couldn't imagine purpose without you, couldn't see past the empty spaces you left behind. But you always told me that broken things had their own beauty, that cracks were where the light got in. The wagon was broken, Maggie. Rotted wood, rusted wheels, decades of neglect. But inside its broken boards was a story of such courage, such love, that it took my breath away. 7 children saved, a family sacrificed and reborn, a promise kept across 8 decades. I think you led me to that auction. I think you knew I needed to find the wagon, not to fix it, but to let it fix me, to show me that grief isn't the end of love, but its continuation, that broken hearts can still hold treasure, that the end of one story can be the beginning of another." The painting sold for $200. With the matching donations, the foundation will have nearly $500 million. Do you understand what that means? Thousands of refugee children will be saved. Families will be reunited. The Yoder's sacrifice will echo through generations. We'll never meet, but whose lives will be transformed. Sarah calls me every day now. She says I'm family. Jonas too. These beautiful souls in their 80s and 90s have adopted me, included me in a story that began before I was born, but somehow needed me to complete it. We're planning next year's gathering already, April 17th, the anniversary of the night the Yoders chose love over law. But here's what I really want to tell you, Maggie. I understand now. I understand that love doesn't end with death, that stories don't end with the last page, that broken things can still carry miracles. The wagon taught me that. Abraham and Ruth taught me that. You taught me that. I'm not ready to date or move on as people keep suggesting, but I'm ready to live. To honor your memory not with grief, but with purpose. To take this broken heart you left me with and let it be a vessel for something beautiful. Thank you, my love, for 45 years of showing me what courage looks like. Thank you for teaching me that every ending is also a beginning. Thank you for believing that stories matter, that connections endure, that love is the only thing that lasts. Until we meet again. Tom folded the letter and placed it in the wagon, in the same compartment where Abraham's journal had waited 80 years. Someday someone would find it and understand that the wagon had saved more than 7 children. It had saved a grieving widower too, had given him purpose when he'd lost his way. A few weeks later, the Holocaust Museum held the opening of the Yoder Bernstein exhibit. The wagon sat in a climate-controlled case, surrounded by the photographs, documents, and testimonies of all those whose lives it had touched. The Rembrandt's story was told there too, though the painting itself was beginning its journey to Berlin. Tom stood with the families as the museum director spoke about the exhibit's significance, but it was Emma, Sarah's 5-year-old great-granddaughter, still clutching the restored doll, who stole the show. My great-grandma was saved by people who loved her, even though she was different, Emma said into the microphone that had to be lowered for her. They gave up everything to save her, and 6 other kids. Now we have to save other kids, because that's what love does. It saves people. The room erupted in applause, but Tom barely heard it. He was thinking about Margaret, about how proud she would be, about how a 50-cent purchase had changed not just his life but potentially thousands of lives. After the opening, Tom drove back to Lancaster County alone. He stopped at the cemetery where Margaret was buried, the first time he'd been able to visit since the funeral. He sat on the bench they'd installed years ago when visiting Margaret's parents, and told her everything about Sarah and Jonas, about Rebecca appearing at the auction, about the foundation, about their children's new paths. "The wagon's in a museum now," he said to the head, "but I kept one piece, a small board from underneath, where no one could see it was missing. I made it into a picture frame. It holds our wedding photo, the one where you're laughing at something I said, where your joy just radiates from the image. It sits where I can see it every morning, this piece of broken wagon holding our perfect moment." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that Margaret had always loved. Tom stood to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and Samuel Stoltzfus and his wife Rebecca have started inviting me to dinner every Sunday. Their daughters are trying to fatten me up with choufle pie and chicken pot pie. The bishop even comes sometimes, wants to hear more about the families we're helping through the foundation. Can you imagine me, Thomas Brennan, breaking bread with an Amish bishop, planning how to save refugee children, all because I bought a broken wagon?" A breeze rustled through the cemetery trees, and Tom could almost hear Margaret's laugh, that beautiful sound that had filled his life with joy for 45. As he drove home through Lancaster County's farmland, past the Stoltzfus farm, past the restored Yoder house that would soon welcome its first refugee family, Tom realized something profound. He wasn't broken anymore. Or rather, he was broken but beautifully so. Like the wagon, damaged but valuable, weathered but worthy, carrying stories and treasures in his fractured spaces. His phone rang. It was Sarah. "Tom, I just wanted to tell you that the first family arrived at the safe house today. A mother and 3 children from Syria. The youngest is 4, the same age I was when the Yoders took us in. She has the biggest eyes, so frightened but so hopeful." "What's her name?" Tom asked. "Ruth," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Her name is Ruth. Her mother didn't know the story when she named her. But now, it's perfect, isn't it? Ruth has come home to the Yoder house." Tom agreed it was perfect. Everything about this story, from its tragic beginning to its triumphant continuation, was perfect in its imperfection, beautiful in its brokenness, complete in its incompleteness. That night, Tom sat in his garage, in Margaret's chair, looking at the empty space where the wagon had been. But it wasn't really empty. The space was full of memory, of purpose, of the echoes of a story that would continue long after everyone who'd witnessed it was gone. He thought about Abraham and Ruth Yoder, who'd given up everything for strangers. He thought about Sarah and Jonas and Rebecca, who'd survived and thrived and returned to bear witness. He thought about the 43 descendants whose lives were testimonies to the power of sacrifice. He thought about the refugee families, even now preparing to come to America through the foundation, their own stories of survival just beginning. But mostly he thought about Margaret, and how she'd always believed that love was the most powerful force in the universe, that stories could change the world, that broken things could still be beautiful. "You were right, Maggie," he whispered to the empty garage. "You were right about all of it." Outside, the October moon rose full and bright over Lancaster County, the same moon that had watched over a terrified Amish family fleeing with 7 Jewish children 80 years ago, the same moon that had witnessed countless acts of courage and cowardice, love and loss, endings and beginnings. Tom closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that somewhere, in whatever came after this life, Margaret was smiling too. The wagon had completed its journey, but the story would go on forever, rippling through time in waves of love and sacrifice, proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when the moment demanded it. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, carrying refugees of a different time to safety, and Tom thought how Abraham Yoder would have appreciated the symmetry. His sacrifice for 7 children in 1943, making possible the salvation of hundreds more in 2020. The wagon was gone, but its work continued. The painting was sold, but its true value was just beginning to be realized. Margaret was dead, but her belief in the power of stories lived on in every life the foundation would save. And Tom was no longer broken, or at least not broken in a way that mattered. He was like the wagon itself, weathered, worn, marked by time and loss, but carrying within his worn frame treasures beyond measure. Memories of love, stories of courage, and the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable things come disguised as junk, waiting for someone with eyes to see their true worth. As he stood to go inside, Tom touched the small piece of wagon wood he'd made into a frame, running his fingers over its rough surface one more time. "Thank you," he said to the wagon, to the Yoders, to Margaret, to the mysterious forces that had brought him to that auction on that October day when he'd thought his life was over. It wasn't over, it was transformed, and in that transformation, in that movement from brokenness to purpose, from grief to grace, from ending to beginning, was the real treasure, worth more than any painting, more precious than any artifact. It was the treasure of understanding that love transcends everything: time, death, faith, nationality, and even the seemingly insurmountable walls we build between ourselves. Love finds a way. Love hides paintings and children. Love keeps secrets for 80 years. Love brings broken people to broken wagons. Love sells masterpieces to save strangers. Love continues. Always. Love continues. Tom Brennan stood in the newly built Yoder Bernstein Center in Lancaster County, watching through the window as a group of refugee children played in the garden. The center, built on part of the old Yoder farm, had become a beacon of hope, processing and supporting over 3,000 refugee families in its first 5 years. At 73, Tom moved a bit slower now, but his purpose had never been clearer. He served as the foundation's historian, documenting each family's story, ensuring that none would be forgotten. Lisa ran the legal department with fierce dedication. Michael's educational platform had reached over 1 million students worldwide, teaching them about the power of individual choice in the face of evil. Sarah had passed 2 years ago, at 91, but not before seeing the foundation save its 1,000th family. Her last words to Tom had been, "Tell them about the cellar. Tell them we were scared but we survived. Tell them love wins." Jonas had followed 6 months later, aged 99, finally at peace with his family's sacrifice. His children had become integral parts of the foundation, ensuring their grandparents' legacy lived on. Rebecca Weiss Hartley, now 93 and the last of the 7, visited monthly. She would sit with the new refugee children, teaching them English just as Ruth Yoder had taught her, using the same Bible, the same patience, the same love. The wagon remained in the Holocaust Museum, viewed by thousands each month. But its story had transcended its physical presence. The Wagon Testament, as historians had begun calling the event, had inspired similar foundations worldwide. The Rembrandt hung in Berlin, but reproductions hung in refugee centers globally. Rebecca Bernstein's eyes watching over new generations of displaced children. Tom walked to his office, where Margaret's picture sat in its wagon wood frame. Beside it was a new photo, all 1,147 children the foundation had saved so far, standing in front of the center, holding a banner that read, "Love continues." His phone rang. Another family had been approved for transport from Afghanistan. Another mother and children fleeing terror. Another chance to choose love over indifference. "Send them to the Yoder house," Tom said. "Tell them they're coming home." He hung up and looked at Margaret's picture. "Still saving the world, Maggie. One broken wagon, one rescued family, one story at a time." Outside his window, in the garden where the old wagon shed had once stood, refugee children played with the descendants of the original 7. They played without knowledge of the boundaries that had once divided their grandparents, Jew and Gentile, Amish and English, native and refugee. They just played, their laughter rising like prayers into the Pennsylvania sky. And somewhere Tom was certain, Abraham and Ruth Yoder were watching, finally understanding that their sacrifice had not been an ending, but a beginning, that their choice to save 7 children had rippled through time, saving thousands more, that their broken wagon had carried not just a valuable painting, but an invaluable truth. Love is the only thing that lasts. Love is the only thing that matters. Love continues, always. Love continues.